Hello everyone, Father Jeff Lewis here. And earlier this month I began a new weekly video series called Saints Marching, during which I tell about a saint of the week each week. I am selecting some of our lesser known saints in the hope that our knowledge of the saints will be expanded. And our Saints Marching Saint of the Week this week is Saint Anastasia. Her memorial is December 25th. Interesting, we'll talk about that in a moment. She was born in the late 2nd century and was put to death in the early part of the 3rd century. Now, Saint Anastasia certainly is a saint about whom we rarely hear in our Western church tradition because she has that peculiar distinction of having her memorial on December 25th, as I mentioned, the same day, of course, as Christmas. Now, why would any saint be assigned a memorial on the same day as Christmas? Seems like the church could have planned that a little better, right? Well, I suspect it is because she is far more popular amongst our Eastern Christian brothers, like in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and so on. Our Eastern Christian brothers and sisters. And the church in the East tends to make a much bigger deal out of celebrating the birth of Jesus not on December 25th or Christmas, but on January 6th each year, which is the traditional date when we celebrate the solemnity of the Epiphany. And so why then? Why does the Eastern Church celebrate the Epiphany to greater solemnity than Christmas? And that is because the Epiphany commemorates that moment when the Magi, the wise men from the East, who were not there immediately on the day of the Lord's birth. They arrived later, but that's when they arrived. And so the Epiphany commemorates that, when the birth of Christ was made known to the people in the East. And so that is the importance for the Christians in the East, and so they celebrate the birth of Christ on that day when the birth of Christ was made manifest to them, the people of the East, through the Magi, the wise men of the East. Okay, so that's the bigger kind of Christmas celebration for the church in the East, and therefore that frees up December 25th for the celebration of the saints in the Eastern Christian traditions, which includes Saint Anastasia. So anyway, that's, I suspect, why her feast day is on December 25th. Now, who is she? She was a martyr who suffered for Jesus and was killed during the time of anti-Christian persecution during what is perhaps the worst of the reign and tyrannies of the Roman emperors, and this was the Emperor Diocletian. And he was, as I say, perhaps the most ferocious of the Roman emperors as far as that goes. Her heroic witness earned her the veneration of the faithful very early on, and she is one of only 7 women mentioned by name in the first Eucharistic prayer, which is known also as the Roman Canon. Her father was a noble pagan named Praetextatus, I think I've pronounced that correctly, and her mother actually was a Christian, herself a saint as well, in the Eastern tradition, Saint Fausta of Sirmium. Because her mother was a Christian, Anastasia was baptized as an infant, and she was secretly raised with Christian values, against the wishes, apparently, of her pagan father. Now, after the death of her mother, Anastasia's father gave her in marriage to a pagan named Publius, but she preserved her virginity. So apparently they went through the marriage, but she would not allow the marriage to be consummated. So she preserved her virginity, having promised herself to the Lord and to him alone. During the persecutions of Diocletian, she would visit prisons and care for the faithful who were imprisoned. She would feed them, care for the wounds, dress their wounds, and even find money sometimes to ransom them from prison before they would be put to death. Now, but her servant informed her to Publius, that was her pagan husband, and he then had her locked up and he had her beaten. So apparently her Christian faith was kept secret from her husband, despite not consummating the marriage, I suppose. Or maybe he knew about the Christian marriage and decided to keep it secret, but now she's decided not to keep it secret and is going around helping other Christians, so he's infuriated. In any event, she was locked up and she was beaten. When he determined that she had learned her lesson, so to speak, he released her, but she began corresponding secretly with a spiritual advisor, another saint, Saint Chrysogonus, and he encouraged her to be brave and patient and to accept God's will, as she was discerning God's will, how to help other Christians. Okay. She eventually sought to follow Saint Chrysogonus when he left Rome for another town, but he himself was denounced as a Christian on the way, and he was personally interrogated by Diocletian himself. But he never renounced his faith, and so he was ordered to be beheaded and thrown into the sea. Now Saint Anastasia is left without her spiritual advisor. And so after his death, Anastasia spent her time traveling from city to city, caring for other Christian prisoners, as she had been doing. She healed their wounds and relieved their pain as well as she was able. And she was given the title by other Christians, Deliverer from Potions, because she would often heal many from the effects of poisons and potions that were given to them, apparently, maybe as part of their torture. She was arrested in Illyricum and taken to the prefect of the district for being Christian. He tried to persuade her to deny her faith and even threatened her with torture, but she would not be swayed. And so she was given a choice between riches or suffering, luxuries or torture devices, and she chose torture. She was given 3 days to reconsider her choice, during which time her would-be torturer planned to rape her. But the very moment that he dared to touch her, he was suddenly blinded and his head struck with extreme pain. So he fled from there, but on his way to the pagan temple, where maybe he thought he could be cured of this, he fell down dead. Anastasia, now free, because her imprisoner is no longer around, I guess, and so no one to accuse her, so she was let free. So she's free once again, so she set out once again, and once again to care for imprisoned Christians. But soon she was caught once again. Imagine that, she keeps, putting herself out there as a Christian, and, well, you're going to get caught, I guess. So she gets caught once again. She was ordered to death now by starvation, and she was starved for 60 days. But she was not harmed. She was preserved by special grace. So she was then taken to the island of Palmaria, where she was staked to the ground with her arms and legs stretched out, and then she was burned alive while staked to the ground. Now her relics after all that, meaning her bones, the rest of her remains, they were taken to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul in the western part of Turkey. She was taken to Constantinople, and there a church was dedicated to her in her honor. And later her head and one of her hands were transferred to the monastery and named in her honor, the monastery of St. Anastasia, which is near Mount Athos. And Mount Athos is in the northern part of Greece, I believe. So she is, among other things, patron saint of martyrs, her fellow martyrs, weavers, and those suffering from poison. So there's a little bit there about St. Anastasia. And thank you for tuning in. St. Anastasia, pray for us.